Eudaimonia, an ancient Greek word, often translated as happiness but meaning something deeper. It comes from eu, meaning good, and daimon, a guiding inner spirit, not a feeling, not pleasure, but a way of being. For Aristotle, eudaimonia was the result of a life lived with virtue and reason, a life where actions and values move in the same direction, where the soul is not divided against itself. It is not something you chase, it emerges when a life is lived well. Not happiness as the world sells it to you, but happiness as the soul recognizes it. Not a rush of pleasure, not a smile captured for a moment, but a quiet sense that your life is aligned with something deeper and truer than desire. Long before happiness became a product, philosophers were already warning that most people were chasing the wrong thing. They observed something unsettling. Those who pursued pleasure directly often ended up restless, empty, and dissatisfied, while those who pursued virtue, meaning, and inner excellence seemed to carry a strange and lasting peace. The Greeks gave that state a name: eudaimonia. We live in a time obsessed with feeling good. We measure our lives by moments of pleasure, comfort, recognition, and excitement. Yet anxiety is everywhere. Depression is rising. Loneliness is epidemic. This raises an uncomfortable question. If happiness is truly about pleasure and satisfaction, why do so many people who have everything still feel hollow inside? And why, at the same time, do some people who live simply, who give, who act with integrity, often report a deeper sense of fulfillment even when life is difficult? Aristotle believed the answer was obvious, though not easy to accept. He argued that happiness is not an emotion, but an activity of the soul in accordance with virtue. In other words, happiness is not something that happens to you. It is something you become through the way you live. Just as a knife fulfills its purpose by cutting well, and a musician fulfills theirs by playing well, a human being fulfills their nature by living well. And living well, for Aristotle, meant cultivating character, reason, and moral excellence. This is where eudaimonia departs radically from modern ideas of happiness. Pleasure can be felt by anyone, even accidentally. Eudaimonia must be earned. It is the result of shaping yourself over time through choices that reflect who you are at your best, not who you are when driven by impulse or fear. That is why Aristotle insisted that no one could truly be called happy until their life was seen as a whole. Happiness was not a mood. It was a verdict on a life well lived. There is a quiet but powerful implication here. If happiness depends on virtue, then doing good is not a sacrifice made for some external reward. It is the very condition for inner fulfillment. When you act justly, honestly, courageously, and with compassion, you are not losing something. You are becoming more fully yourself. And when you act against your conscience, even if no one sees it, something within you fractures. You may gain pleasure, advantage, or status, but you lose coherence. You lose inner unity. This explains why guilt, shame, and inner conflict are so corrosive. They are not merely social constructs or learned reactions. They are signals of disharmony within the soul. The Greeks understood this intuitively. To live unjustly was not simply wrong, it was unhealthy. It distorted the soul. It pulled a person away from eudaimonia, even if their external life looked successful. Eudaimonia, then, is not about being nice all the time, nor about self-denial for its own sake. It is about living in a way that allows your rational, moral, and emotional capacities to work together instead of against each other. It is about becoming the kind of person who does not need to lie to themselves to sleep at night, the kind of person whose happiness does not depend on applause, validation, or constant stimulation. This is why doing good often feels quietly right, even when it is hard. There is a subtle sense of alignment that follows moral action, a feeling that, despite discomfort or loss, something within you has settled into its proper place. Aristotle would say, this is not coincidence. It is the soul functioning as it was meant to function. The tragedy of modern life is not that people suffer. Suffering is unavoidable. The tragedy is that many suffer while chasing an idea of happiness that can never satisfy them. They pursue pleasure without purpose, success without meaning, freedom without responsibility, and then they wonder why fulfillment keeps slipping through their fingers. Eudaimonia offers a different path. It asks a more demanding question, but also a more honest one. Not what makes you feel good now, but what makes you worthy of your own respect. Not what distracts you from emptiness, but what fills it. And not what pleases you in the moment, but what allows you to look at your life and say quietly and without pretense that it was lived well. If eudaimonia is not a feeling but a way of being, then a crucial question follows. Why does moral goodness feel so deeply connected to fulfillment? Why does acting with integrity bring a kind of satisfaction that pleasure alone cannot replicate? Aristotle's answer was rooted in a profound understanding of human nature. Humans are not isolated pleasure-seeking machines. We are rational, social beings, designed to live in relationship with others and with ourselves. When we violate that nature, no amount of pleasure can compensate for the inner damage that follows. Consider what happens internally when a person repeatedly acts against what they know is right. At first, the discomfort is sharp. Over time, it dulls, but it does not disappear. It transforms into restlessness, cynicism, or a quiet contempt for oneself. The person may become skilled at justification, telling themselves stories to escape responsibility. But those stories require constant maintenance. This inner division is exhausting. It consumes mental and emotional energy that could have been used to live, create, and love. Eudaimonia becomes impossible not because the world is cruel, but because the soul is at war with itself. By contrast, when someone acts in alignment with their values, even in difficult circumstances, something stabilizes within them. Their actions, thoughts, and self-image begin to converge. This convergence is not euphoric, it is grounding. It produces a sense of solidity, as if one were standing on firm ground instead of shifting sand. This is why virtue, for Aristotle, was not about rigid moral rules, but about developing practical wisdom, the ability to choose well in complex, real-life situations. Virtue was a skill, refined through practice, not an abstract ideal imposed from outside. Eudaimonia also depends on the idea of purpose. Every action, Aristotle observed, aims at some perceived good. But many people mistake intermediate goods for ultimate ones. Wealth, for example, is useful, but it is not an end in itself. Recognition, comfort, and power can all serve purposes, but none can sustain a life. When these become the final aim, the result is emptiness, because they were never meant to carry that weight. Eudaimonia, by contrast, is the ultimate good, precisely because it needs nothing beyond itself. It is the state in which life feels complete rather than endlessly postponed. This perspective reframes the act of doing good. Helping others, acting justly, and choosing honesty are no longer moral obligations imposed by society. They are expressions of a life properly oriented toward its true end. To live well is not to obey external commands, but to understand what kind of being you are and what allows you to flourish. In this sense, ethics is not about restriction, but about liberation from self-sabotage. There is also an important social dimension to eudaimonia. Aristotle rejected the idea that happiness could be achieved in isolation. A flourishing life unfolds within a community. Friendship, trust, and mutual respect are not accessories to happiness. They are essential components of it. When you act ethically, you do not only preserve your inner harmony, you also contribute to the stability and meaning of the relationships around you. And in doing so, you create an environment in which your own flourishing becomes more likely. This may explain why acts of kindness, even small ones, often leave a lingering sense of warmth and meaning. They reinforce our sense of belonging in the world. They remind us that we are participants in a shared human story, not merely spectators or competitors. Eudaimonia grows in this soil, where personal integrity and social connection reinforce each other rather than compete. Yet eudaimonia does not promise an easy life. Aristotle was clear. A good life still includes misfortune, loss, and pain. Virtue does not make you invulnerable, but it does make you resilient. When adversity strikes, a person who has cultivated inner coherence does not collapse as easily into despair. Their suffering has context. It is endured by someone who knows who they are and what they stand for. That knowledge itself becomes a source of strength. In this way, eudaimonia stands in quiet opposition to the modern obsession with constant happiness. It accepts sadness as part of life without allowing it to define life. It values depth over intensity, coherence over excitement, and meaning over momentary pleasure. It suggests that the question is not how to avoid suffering, but how to suffer without losing oneself. Ultimately, the pursuit of eudaimonia asks for courage. It requires resisting the easy comforts of distraction and the false promises of instant gratification. It demands patience, self-reflection, and a willingness to grow. But what it offers in return is not fragile. It is a form of fulfillment that does not vanish when circumstances change, because it is rooted in who you have become, not in what you temporarily possess. To understand eudaimonia fully, it helps to confront a difficult truth. Many people are not unhappy because life has treated them unfairly, but because they have misunderstood what happiness is. They seek fulfillment in outcomes rather than in character, in being admired rather than in being worthy of admiration, in feeling good rather than in being good. This confusion creates a perpetual chase. Each achievement promises satisfaction, yet quickly demands another. The horizon keeps moving and fulfillment never arrives. Aristotle warned that this pattern is not accidental. Pleasure, success, and comfort are unstable by nature. They depend on external conditions that can change without warning. When happiness is tied to these things, the soul becomes fragile. Eudaimonia offers stability precisely because it depends primarily on what is within one's control, one's choices, habits, and way of being in the world. This does not eliminate vulnerability, but it reduces dependence on fortune for inner peace. At the heart of this idea lies habituation. No one becomes virtuous by accident. Just as a musician becomes skilled by practicing daily, a person becomes just by acting justly, brave by acting bravely, generous by acting generously. Eudaimonia is not a reward given at the end of moral effort. It emerges gradually as virtue becomes second nature. Over time, doing the right thing no longer feels like a struggle between desire and duty. It feels natural. The soul moves without friction. This explains why moral growth often feels uncomfortable at first. Early on, virtue requires resistance against laziness, fear, selfishness, and impulse. But as habits change, so does identity. The person you become begins to desire what is truly good for you, not merely what is immediately pleasurable. At that point, happiness stops being something you chase and starts being something you inhabit. There is a psychological depth to this that modern thinkers would later rediscover. Inner peace arises when actions align with values, when the self is not fragmented into conflicting parts. Many forms of anxiety can be understood as signals of misalignment. When you live in a way that contradicts your deeper sense of right and wrong, the mind protests. When you live in harmony with it, the mind settles. Eudaimonia also clarifies why moral compromise, even when rewarded externally, often leaves a bitter aftertaste. Success achieved through dishonesty or exploitation may bring comfort or status, but it quietly erodes self-trust. Without self-trust, confidence becomes fragile, and self-esteem depends increasingly on external validation. The person must keep winning, keep impressing, keep being seen. Eudaimonia, by contrast, grows inward. It does not require constant proof. Another essential aspect of eudaimonia is the integration of reason and emotion. Aristotle did not believe that emotions should be suppressed. He believed they should be educated. Virtue is not the absence of feeling, but the ability to feel appropriately. Anger, for example, is not a vice in itself. It becomes virtuous when directed at the right things, in the right way, and for the right reasons. When emotions are aligned with reason, the soul becomes balanced rather than divided. This balance is rare in a culture that oscillates between indulgence and repression. Many people either surrender to every impulse or attempt to numb themselves entirely. Both extremes produce dissatisfaction. Eudaimonia lies in the middle path, where desire is guided rather than denied, and where pleasure is enjoyed without being mistaken for life's purpose. It is important to recognize that eudaimonia is deeply personal, yet not subjective. It does not mean doing whatever feels right in the moment. It means discovering, through reflection and experience, what truly contributes to human flourishing. This requires honesty. It requires the willingness to admit that some desires lead nowhere, and that some forms of suffering are worth enduring because they shape a better self. In this sense, eudaimonia is not soft or sentimental. It does not promise comfort at all times. It promises meaning, and meaning has weight. It anchors a life. It allows a person to endure difficulty without losing direction. When you know why you are living, many of life's hardships become bearable, even transformative. As the idea of eudaimonia unfolds, it becomes clear that happiness is not something added to life from the outside. It is the shape life takes when lived well. It is the quiet confidence of a person who knows that, even in imperfection, they are moving in the right direction, and that knowledge, subtle but enduring, may be the deepest form of happiness available to a human being. If eudaimonia is the fulfillment of a life lived in alignment with virtue, then its final insight is perhaps the most challenging. Happiness is not something you can demand from life. It is something life allows when you become the kind of person capable of receiving it. This reverses the modern relationship between self and world. Instead of asking what the world owes you, eudaimonia asks what kind of presence you bring into the world. This is why eudaimonia cannot be reduced to a technique, a routine, or a formula. It is not a productivity hack, nor a mindset trick. It is a lifelong orientation. It unfolds slowly, through thousands of small choices that rarely feel heroic in the moment. Choosing honesty when a lie would be easier. Choosing patience when anger feels justified. Choosing responsibility when avoidance promises comfort. Over time, these choices shape a character, and that character shapes a life. One of the quiet strengths of eudaimonia is that it frees a person from resentment. When happiness is tied to external rewards, it is easy to feel cheated when life does not cooperate. But when fulfillment comes from living well, circumstances lose some of their power to embitter. Misfortune still hurts, but it does not feel meaningless. The individual remains intact, even when outcomes disappoint. Eudaimonia also redefines success. A successful life is not the one most admired, but the one most internally coherent. It is measured not by how impressive it looks, but by how honestly it is lived. This does not mean withdrawing from ambition or achievement, but placing them in their proper place. Achievements become expressions of character rather than substitutes for it. There is a profound dignity in this view of happiness. It suggests that fulfillment is available to anyone willing to cultivate virtue, regardless of status, wealth, or recognition. It is not reserved for the fortunate few. It is earned through attention, discipline, and care for the soul. In this way, eudaimonia is quietly democratic. It does not promise equal outcomes, but it offers equal access to meaning. In a world that constantly encourages comparison, eudaimonia offers relief. You no longer need to measure your life against the curated images of others. Your standard becomes internal. Are your actions aligned with your values? Are you becoming more honest, more courageous, more just? Are you capable of respect for yourself when no one is watching? These questions do not depend on trends, algorithms, or public opinion. This inner orientation does not isolate you from others. On the contrary, it deepens connection. A person grounded in eudaimonia does not need to use others as mirrors for their worth. They can meet people as they are, without manipulation or performance. Friendship, love, and community become spaces of mutual flourishing rather than competition. The good life expands outward. Perhaps the most radical aspect of eudaimonia is its patience. It accepts that a meaningful life cannot be rushed. It is not built in moments of intensity, but in consistency. It understands that growth is uneven, that failure is part of formation, and that perfection is neither possible nor required. What matters is direction. What matters is sincerity. In the end, eudaimonia does not offer a dramatic conclusion. There is no final moment where happiness is secured forever. Instead, it offers something quieter and more enduring, the sense that your life makes sense, that your choices are not random, that your efforts are not wasted, that even in uncertainty, you are participating in something worthwhile. This may be why doing good feels meaningful even when it costs you. It affirms your place in the moral fabric of life. It confirms that you are not merely reacting to the world, but actively shaping yourself within it. And in that shaping, happiness emerges not as a reward, but as a natural state of alignment. Eudaimonia is not the promise that life will be easy. It is the promise that life can be good in the deepest sense of the word. Not because it gives you everything you want, but because it allows you to become someone you can live with, someone you can respect, someone at peace.